Jack here, owner of Hockey Alley, bringing you back hockey history. Stories of forgotten, stories you never heard about, or stories that you remembered. I'm here today talking with NHL player Morris Lukowich. How are you doing?
Well, Jack, I'm doing really well, thank you. So nice to chat with you today.
Same here. We played a pickup a long time ago together. I was about 14 years old, and I remember you came out and played with us. It was at Burbank when you were with the Kings.
Yeah, I think that was actually the summer of 1986.
Yes.
And it was the only time I ever skated at the Burbank Arena. And I loved the arena because it was open on the one end and could actually see outside. And also, a memorable thing that night was I was with my one of my best buddies, Ron McPhail from Calgary. He was down visiting in LA, and we ended up there. And also, Alan Thicke was on the ice skating around with us, and so it was fun to be on the ice with Alan Thicke. And sadly, though, Alan slashed me one time, and I didn't know who he was. And at the appropriate moment, I gave him an elbow and accidentally knocked him out. So I remember when he was laying on the ice, and somebody came over and said, "Wow, you just knocked out Alan Thicke." And the thing is, I knew Alan, and we were buddies because we had done some stuff together for CTVD in Canada. And so I woke him up and said, "Alan, I'm sorry I elbowed you." But I said, "Alan, you know how much you slashed me here in this." So, anyways.
Yeah, that was
It was a memorable night.
Yes. And how many
Jack,
years?
if I remember you,
Yes.
there was a young guy out there just flying around.
That was me. I think I was the only kid out there. It was all adults playing. I mean, and I don't know if we were on the same line or not, but we sat on the bench at the same time. I forgot if we were on the same team or against each other. I forgot about. It's been a long time ago.
Oh, wow. It was. It was the only time I ever skated there.
Yeah. How many years did you play in the NHL? Oh, yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Yeah. How many years did you play in the NHL?
I was 8 years in the NHL, and I was 3 years in the World Hockey Association, the WHA. Prior to that, I played 2 years with the Houston Aeros in 1976 to 78, and then Houston folded at that time, and 7 of us were purchased by the Winnipeg Jets in the World Hockey Association, and that's how I ended up in Winnipeg. It was we went there and we actually won the last World Hockey Association championship, and we beat out Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers, and it was Gretzky's first year in the World Hockey, and we beat them in 6 games.
Wow. And he was a rookie coming into he was about 17, turning 18.
Yeah, he was a rookie, and he was already just an absolute incredible player.
And what about Mark Messier? How was he with the Cincinnati Stingers? Did he stand out at that time?
No, he did not. And it was he just sort of seemed to be a bit of a plugger centerman. Mm-hmm. And I believe he actually struggled in his scoring in that first year. I mean, he was a sizable player, and but he really improved after he moved on from Cincinnati.
Yeah. And you were in Houston, so you had Gordie Howe on your team.
Yes. I've got kind of a cool Gordie Howe story.
Yes.
Because I believe Gordie Howe had a huge piece in my becoming a professional hockey player. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, about 70 miles north of Saskatoon and 30 miles east of North Battleford, in a little town called Spears, Saskatchewan. Mm-hmm. And we were 150 people. Like, we didn't even have an indoor hockey rink. So, like, when I talk with kids nowadays, I tell them that miracles can happen, and dreams can come true, and miracles can happen because I somehow got to the NHL. I mean, like, we didn't even have an indoor rink. So, but what happened was, when I was about 10, walked into an Eaton store in Saskatoon, and it was a place called Midtown Plaza. And actually, my brother Ed, who was 10 years older than me and was my mentor and coach as I was growing up as a boy, and he taught me golf and tennis and baseball and curling and hockey, and he ended up being the world curling champion in 1986.
Wow.
And he was the best in the world at one time. And then he became the coach of the U.S. Olympic curling program for about 9 years. So he's had a nice interaction with the American team, or teams. But anyways, we walked into the Eatons that day to buy a ball glove, and I had never met a professional hockey player before, and I looked down as we walked into the sporting goods department, and there was a man sitting at a table just doodling away on some paper, and he had on an open blue shirt and a blue blazer. And I remember I stopped in my tracks and I looked over and I said to my brother Ed, "Is that Gordie Howe?" And my brother Ed looked at me and said, "Wow, I think it is." And I said, "What is he doing here?" And my brother Ed said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, what do we do? Like, do we go say hi to him?" And I started to get all nervous and panicky. I'd never met a professional hockey player before, like an NHL pro. And I remember I said to him, "So what do we do?" And my brother, being an amazing mentor, said, "You know what, I don't know. What do you think?" Like, he gave me the decision. He gave me the choice. And I remember I was kind of spinning. I was getting all nervous, anxious, and then all of it, like, I kind of just closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and there was a voice that just said, "Just go for it." And I remember I talk about the next step. That next step is so important in our lives. Like, that next step, it could be getting into a car with a drunken driver. It could be towards drugs. It could be towards alcohol. It could be to some other addiction. That next step, like, instead of going to buy a ball glove, I took that next step towards Gordie Howe. And it was amazing. He was there signing autographs in the middle of July. It was a hot day. And Eaton had not told anybody, and so we were the only guys there. Wow. And so we got to talk with Al for 45 minutes. So it ended up, I just was off his left side and watching him. And I was a small guy. I mean, 4 foot nothing. And it ended up my brother Ed and Gordie did all the talking. And it ended up they talked about hockey, curling, golf, fishing, and baseball. And at the end of the 45 minutes, they finally got all talked out, and it ended up Gordie looked over to me and he said, "Morris, would you like an autographed picture?" And I said, "Mr. Howe, I would love one." And he said, "Morris," he says, "you know, what do you love most about hockey?" And I thought about it for a second, and I said, "Mr. Howe, I love to score goals." And he laughed. I mean, he got a real chuckle out of that. And so then he started to sign the autograph, and he signed it to MAUR. And so I could see that he was signing it Maurice. And I said, "Well, Mr. Howe, excuse me, but you know what? My name is Morris. It's Morris." And he said, "Well, but you said you love to score goals, and Maurice the Rocket Richard is one of the greatest scorers of all time. So are you okay if I sign it Maurice?" And I thought about it for a second, and I didn't really like the idea, but who was I to tell Gordie Howe what to do? So I said, "Sure." So he actually made up to Maurice, score lots of goals, Gordie Howe. And I took that picture home and I put it up on the wall. And I cut out another picture and put it up beside it. I cut out a picture of Bobby Hull pitching a bale of hay. And if you've ever seen this picture, Jack,
yes,
Bobby Hull looks like the Incredible Hulk. Yeah. He has muscles everywhere. And the golden hair, and it's on a summer day in Ontario, and he's got his shirt off. And he looks so incredible. And I put that up on the wall at night. And I actually coach on this about visualization. I would say my prayers, and the prayer would be, "Lord, please, someday, can I play with Gordie Howe? And while you're at it, will you throw in Bobby Hull?" Wow. And incredibly, Jack, both of those came true. Wow. It ended up that I got drafted out of the Medicine Hat Tigers, where I played junior. And the darndest thing is, Gordie actually had retired. He was out of hockey. And I can remember thinking, how am I ever going to play with Gordie? He's retired. And it ended up that Bobby Hull left the NHL, left the Chicago Blackhawks, went to Winnipeg in 1972 to form. He was the cornerstone of the WHA. And then a year later, Gordie Howe came out of retirement to play with his sons in Houston.
Wow.
Quite incredibly, I get drafted in the NHL by Pittsburgh and by the Houston Aeros in the WHA. And it came down. It was incredible, Jack. There's another story that goes with it, but ended up my agent disappeared when it came to negotiating my contract. So my brother Ed and I actually negotiated my first pro contract. And in the end, I had to make a choice. The numbers were the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up that we had to make a choice. And it was like, there was a moment where I had to choose between the NHL and Pittsburgh or the WHA in Houston. And it was, again, I asked my brother Ed, I said, what do you think? My brother Ed, being an amazing mentor, said, I don't know. What do you think? And he gave me the choice again. And life is so much about it's a matter of choices, not chances.
Yes.
And it ended up that I said, so I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath. It was incredible. I was thinking Pittsburgh, NHL, Houston, WHA, and I was going back and forth, and all of a sudden there was like a voice, I call it intuition, said, go play with Gordie Howe.
Yeah.
And I remember I was talking with Rick Blair. He was the general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was on the phone, and I went back on the phone and I said, Mr. Blair, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come to Pittsburgh, yet you know what, I just really want to play with Gordie Howe. To which he said, well, you little shit. Oh. He said, you'll never play a day in the NHL, and hung up on me. And so it ended up that I got on the phone and I called Bill Dineen in Houston and said, Mr. Dineen, he was the coach and general manager. I said, you know what, really, I just want to play with Gordie Howe. And he said, fantastic. And so it ended up, I went down and got to play my 1 year with Gordie, and then they went to Hartford. They signed contracts, but ended up I played with Gordie, Mark, and Marty. And I've got tons of Gordie Howe stories and Mark and Marty stories. It was one of the most incredible years of my life, and it really. And then after that, got to play with Bobby Hull in Winnipeg.
Yes.
When Houston folded, and we went up to Winnipeg. So it ended up that both of my dreams came true.
That's amazing. What a story! Wow.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's
one of
amazing.
my favorites to tell.
Yeah, I want to ask
because
you.
It really,
yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was saying it just really is the power of visualization right at bedtime, or let's say the first moments in the morning when we're waking up, are such powerful times. And I really believe that just an innocent boy's prayer right at bedtime was just huge in my getting to the NHL. And the fact, I got drafted. I mean, I got drafted to the Houston Aeros where Gordie was. Like, there were so many coincidences that just kind of fell into place.
Yeah. Did he remember you as a kid? Did he remember you when he was? No, he did
not.
He did not.
And I was okay with that. But you know what the interesting thing is? He does remember talking with Ed. But he did not remember talking with me. Yeah.
And any words of wisdom from Gordie Howe to the players when he was in the dressing room? What did he tell you guys?
You know what? Gordie was very, very, very quiet. So he rarely gave advice. And as a matter of fact, he talked very quietly. And at times, like, I would be straining to hear what he was saying and couldn't hear what he was saying. And I had wondered about this for a long, long time, Jack. And then I only got, a number of years later, I got to play one game in the Detroit Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That was right before, that would have been about 1980, right before they opened up the Joe Louis Arena.
Yes.
In Detroit? Yeah, so I got to play one game in Detroit. There was a couple incredible things about the Olympia. One of them was that on the bench, the only thing that separated us from the crowd was a one little thin piece of wire.
That's it.
Like, I could literally turn around and shake hands and talk with the fans behind me.
Wow.
It ended up that our goaltender, who our backup goaltender, ended up sharing popcorn with a kid who was just sitting right beside him.
That's amazing.
Like, there was nothing between us and the fans. Like, had a fan wanted to just reach over and shoot somebody, he could have. So I'm convinced that Gordy developed this way of talking very quietly so that the fans would not hear him when he was on the bench.
See.
Yeah, because I was puzzled by how come Gordy talks that quietly. Like literally, I'd have to lean in, and quite often I would just be nodding my head, even though I didn't really hear what he had said. And he was one of the most quiet talkers I've ever played with.
Wow.
And so yeah, he didn't give advice in the dressing room. I will say one thing about him though, he protected his boys, and actually he was the dirtiest player I ever played with. His elbows, ick. And you know what was kind of cool, Jack, was I got to be with him after his last game ever. It ended up that he played in a playoff game against the Montreal Canadiens. He was with the Hartford Whalers. And it ended up that Bobby Hull was in the game too. And but Gordy didn't play one shift in overtime. And I happened to be in Hartford doing some hockey broadcasting for Hockey Night in Canada. Mm-hmm. And after the game, I was out walking around, and it was kind of an incredible evening for me after the game because I ran into Larry Robinson from the Montreal Canadiens, who I knew. He was with Ray-Jean Houle and Tremblay, Mario Tremblay, and it ended up that the four of us went and shared some Montreal smoked meat. It ended up that Larry knew a delicatessen in Hartford, the 24-hour deli, and which we went, and after this, they had just won the series against Hartford, and we ended up sitting in, and I got to be with them after their win. But then Larry recommended I go down and just to a pub that was called the Russian Lady. It was really well known, and so I ended up, when I left those guys, I went to the Russian Lady, and here as I was walking down this hallway, I looked over where they had these pool rooms, these billiard rooms.
Yes.
And in this one room was Gordie Howe sitting by himself. Oh. And I stopped, and I went over and I said, Gordie, are you okay if I join you for a beer? And he said, sure. So I went and got us a couple of beer, came back. I got to spend about 2.5 hours with Gordie. Wow. And I think he realized that he was finished. And we got to actually go through his career of he went through the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and there was so many incredible stories. And one of the things I asked him was, I said, Gordie, you know what? Of all the guys I've ever played with, like, you are the dirtiest by a long ways. Your elbows and your stick. And I said, how come? And he thought about it for a moment, and then he said, you know what, Morris? He said in the late 40s, I one time got cross-checked from behind, and I fell headfirst in the boards, and I almost died. And actually, Gordie had to have a plate. He actually had to have part of his skull cut open in order to take the pressure off his brain. And he actually had a little plate in the top of his head. Wow. That actually showed up on an X-ray one time in Houston. So it ended up, he said, you know what, after I got out of the hospital that day, he said, I made a vow to myself that this was never, ever going to happen again. And he said, so I made a decision that it wasn't about getting even with somebody, it was about getting one up. Mm-hmm. And I said, wow, well, did you manage to get one up on a hell of a lot of players? Yeah. And, yeah, and the thing was, when he was playing with his boys, if anybody ever hassled Mark or Marty, there was bloodshed. Like, there was, he was like a mother grizzly. Yeah. And that if anybody ever fooled with the Cubs, like, the mother grizzly came, and there was body parts left laying all over the place. And I've got a number of stories about when and how those happened. But anyway, so you know what, to play with Gordie Howe was, it was such a, like, I was just so lucky. And then to play against him, I wasn't so lucky because I managed a couple of elbows from him, although I think he liked me because he normally, it wasn't a really, really bad elbow. It was just letting me know
Yeah.
Because I think we're pretty good. But he would give me an elbow at the appropriate time, and I would take it and roll with it.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, anyways,
Yeah. And Bobby Hull,
Well,
how
like-
was it? How was it to be with Bobby Hull? He was on your team with Winnipeg in the WHA. How was that to have him on your team?
well, it was incredible. It was more like I was on his team.
Uh-huh.
Okay, first of all, because he was actually a part owner of the Winnipeg Jets.
Oh,
And yeah, so I was. It wasn't. He was on. I was on his team. And what was very, very cool is I got to play with him in the WHA and the NHL.
both.
There's a couple, kind of a, because he played with us last year at WHA for 4 games and then 20 games in the NHL in our first year.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually got to see him retire twice. It was kind of weird. So one of the stories with him, but I just want to mention that Bobby here, remember I had cut out that picture of him, fishing this bale of hay.
Yes.
Where he looks absolutely unbelievable. I encourage everybody on this to just Google Bobby Hull pitching a bale of hay.
Yeah.
He just had the best build of any player I'd ever seen. He was just muscle everywhere, and had muscle and hair, and it just was incredible. So it ended up that the very first practice we had in Winnipeg, in training camp, it ended up I was sitting in one in the dressing room, and Bobby came in and he took his shirt off. And I remember my eyes just popped out and my jaw dropped. Like the real thing was so much more incredible than the picture. He was just muscle.
And no steroids.
And I remember he looked up and
yeah, no steroids, like just natural.
Just natural, yeah. Wow. And I think zero weightlifting, and he just, he did farm work in the summer and, kept him strong. But he ended up that he caught me looking at him, and he started laughing, and I was embarrassed, and I looked down, and a few seconds later looked up to see if he was still looking at me. He was laughing. And I took time, I went over and I said, Bobby, you know what? And I told him, I said, as a kid, I had your picture up on the wall, pitching that bale of hay, but I said, what, the real thing is, what, oh my gosh, what an incredible build. So, these 2 dreams come true, getting to play with Gordy and Bobby. Now, the thing was, though, Bobby was a left winger, and so was I. So, after 4 games, I gave my girlfriend a call at that time, Eva, who I had met in junior hockey. She was back in Medicine Hat. I remember I said, and the thing is, I had scored 40 goals the year before in Houston. So coming to Winnipeg, there was an expectation that I was going to be scoring some goals.
Yes.
And after 4 games, I hadn't scored yet. And I said to Evie, I said, it could be tough to have a good year here this year. She said, why is that? And I said, well, I have seen 0 power play time. She says, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, the coach, Larry Hillman, as soon as we get a penalty, he puts Bobby Hull's line out there, which was Peter Sullivan, Kent Nielsen, and Bobby. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is, about halfway through, Peter Sullivan and Kent Nielsen would change, and Terry Wiskowski and Rich Preston, who were on our line, would jump out there. But Bobby played 1 minute and 55 seconds of every power play.
That's a lot. Wow.
So it ended up that I didn't have 1 second of power play time.
Wow.
That, like, he'd come to the bench and the penalty would just be ending, and so then I would miss my shift sometimes too. And so I said, "Wow, this is crazy." So I said, "I just wonder how it's going to be possible to have a good year." Yeah. So something absolutely miraculous happened, and was that the next day, Bobby called a meeting, and like nobody really knows about this. This is Bobby called a meeting, and at that time he was with a gal I believe by the name of Claudia from Hartford, and what happened? He's held this meeting, and he said, "You know what, guys? Last night after the game, he said, or no, I think the gal's name." Yeah, I think it was Claudia. He said, Claudia and I were walking out to the car and somebody tried to run us down.
Oh.
And was chasing us around in the parking lot with a car. And Claudia is too scared to stay here, and so she wants to go back to Hartford. So I'm going to take her back to Hartford, and once I get her relocated there, I'll be back. And it ended up that Bobby left literally that day, and he for some reason didn't come back and rejoin us during the season. But it was, I mean, it ended up I scored 65 goals that year.
Wow.
One because I played with Terry Ruskowski and Kent Nielsen and Rich Preston, who all loved to set me up with a wide open net from about 8 feet away. And if I was good at anything, I was good at getting to that spot. All that had to show up was the puck, and when it did, I could shoot it into a wide open goal. And the other thing was that Bobby Hall left.
Yeah.
Like, I would have never got the ice time. So it ended up that he left after 4 games, and then I was out there for the minute and 55 seconds. Well,
Wow.
or maybe the minute 30. And all of a sudden I was getting all this power play time, and I think I scored 25 power play goals that year.
It makes a difference.
So, huge. Yeah. And so it is strange stuff that happens. And that was very, very strange. Like, somebody was out there in the snow chasing them around, trying to run them over.
That's crazy. Wow. Was it a fan, or was it just some random person? Did they ever catch him?
Well, Bobby actually knows who it was, yet it's confidential. I'm not able to say.
Got it. I want to ask you, how was his shot? What you saw in person, and I've asked Wally Harris. Wally Harris said it was a blur. And how did he shoot?
Well, Bobby had one of the most amazing, incredible curves ever. And at that time, the WHA didn't have a rule on the size of the curve. And he had just a smoking big toe, like it was curved near the tip of his stick. I've never seen a stick like this. And so what happened was he would take it, he would drill this puck. Sometimes it would go just like a bullet, and sometimes it would knuckle. Like when he would take a slap shot, he was showing me this one time, how he would attempt to get the very tip of the stick on the puck, and then as the puck would the stick would dig in the ice, then it would flex and fire it, but it would knuckle it. And so here was this puck that was going, let's say, 100 mile an hour, and was knuckling. So, like many of the goaltenders at that time that actually did not wear masks, and when I was playing, there was very, very few. I think there was only one that was left. I mean, that must have been so friggin' scary when Bobby would let this slap shot go at 100 mile an hour, and it would be knuckling.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And Bobby normally aimed the very first one at the goaltender's head. So, but he had just an absolutely incredible shot. At that time, though, he had his wrist broken. He had his one wrist broken by, I believe it was his right wrist. Bob Gassoff in an exhibition game had slashed him and broken his wrist. And Bobby, in a conversation one time, said that wrist was never the same. And so there were some times when I was with him where he would misfire the shot, like and afterwards, and he just said it was just that wrist that wasn't 100%. And but boy, when he caught it, it was beautiful to watch.
That's
awesome.
Awesome.
At that time though too, he was playing with Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nielsen. And as much as Bobby had an incredible shot, which was very, very heavy, it took him a little bit longer to shoot than Anders Hedberg. Anders Hedberg had one of the greatest, quickest shots I've ever seen by a player. Wow. And he could get the shot away quicker than Bobby with just about as much miles per hour on it.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. Morris.
Yeah, Hedberg had a incredible shot.
That's awesome. Well, I didn't know that at all. And he was a great player for the Rangers, too, back in the day. He was a hell of a player.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for the great stories. These were awesome to hear coming from you, playing with the great players of the past. And it's awesome to hear. Great stories. I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to me on my channel.
Well, you're welcome, Jack. And you know what? If you wanted to continue this, I'm okay.
Yeah, we probably have to do another segment. Definitely. There's a lot more want to ask about when you were in Winnipeg and all that with the Kings. So there's a lot more. Definitely we'll do another segment in the future. You got it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.